When I was 16 or 17, I was coming home from Brooklyn from a movie in Manhattan with my friends. I was the only one that lived in Brooklyn, so I walked home from the train alone. I was used to being out late by myself. I had a midnight curfew, but I frequently broke it because I thought nothing bad would ever happen to me, despite the uptick in assaults in our neighborhood at the time. This night, however, I was actually slated to get home on time for once. It was the summer after I graduated high school and I was feeling amazing. I had a little to drink and a little to smoke, and I felt like I was on the top of the world. It was so hot out. I remember I was wearing this long, sheer cape thing with a very tight and revealing little dress underneath. However, because of my fun little outfit, I was feeling myself and being so stupid, taking selfies while I walked down the dark streets and listening to music with both headphones in, not paying attention to my surroundings. I think I even sang as I walked. I got into my building after finishing my 10-minute walk from the train and walked up the stairs to our apartment. We lived in a brownstone with apartments in it, and ours was on the 3rd floor. We had a gate at the bottom of the steps separating us from the sidewalk. I pulled out my headphones and began fumbling for my keys at the top of the steps. Just as I found the correct key, still humming to myself and thinking about my great night, I heard the latch of the gate clink as if it had been opened. I turned around and saw a man standing at the gate, staring up at me. He was young, probably early 20s, wearing a gray hoodie with his hood up, which was covering part of his face, but I could see his eyes and immediately knew something was off because of how blank yet nervous his expression was. One hand was on the handle of the gate as if he was about to open it completely, but stopped once I turned around. Somehow my fight or flight instinct didn't kick in. It was probably the alcohol. I cautiously called down, "Can I help you?" And he didn't respond. I looked him over more closely and realized that his other hand, the one that was not on the gate, was moving fast, low, near his waist. I registered that he was touching himself, gasped, and within milliseconds, he was sprinting up the stairs behind me, reaching his hand out to grab me. My brain clicked into place and I started screaming at the top of my lungs as I jammed my key into the door and slammed it behind me. I ran upstairs to my apartment screaming for my dad, not even stopping to make sure the door was locked, thinking that if he followed me upstairs, he would soon meet my very tall father and very loud dogs who slept in the bedroom right next to the apartment door. As I looked over my shoulder while tearing it up the stairs, I saw his face pressed up against the glass window, still watching me, but now his eyes were furious. I ran into my apartment still screaming, telling my parents to call the police. My dad went downstairs and looked around, but he was gone. The police came anyways after my mom called and came upstairs to get my statement so they could make their report. The 2 cops who showed up asked me to describe him. I did, and they said that they would cruise around looking for him, and regardless if he was found, a detective would call me soon to make a more detailed report. They never called me. There are much more sexual assaults and assaults that continue to take place in my neighborhood for the rest of the summer. I shudder every time I think about what would have happened if I hadn't taken out my headphones before I began unlocking my door. I don't know how long he was following me for, and as far as I know, he was never caught. From that point on, for those last few weeks before I left for college, I would call my dad to make sure he met me at the train station so he could walk me home safely. Now as an adult, I'm far more cautious than I was as a teenager. I'm always extra aware of my surroundings, especially at night, and I don't look at my phone while I walk home. I'll never get that image of his blank stare as he lunged towards me out of my head. I'll never get that feeling out of the pit of my stomach as I realized he followed me home, watching me and touching himself, and was now waiting to strike. It was like a deer realizing it was being stalked by a tiger because the tiger accidentally stepped on a twig and gave itself away right before it could pounce on its prey. I'm a 19-year-old female from Ireland. Just to clarify for anyone who may not know, the legal drinking age is 18 in Ireland, so I'm not breaking any laws. Just thought I would mention that since I was in a bar. It was a Friday afternoon, and me and my friend got ready to head out to the bar to relax after a stressful week at college. We had both bought new dresses the week prior, and were excited to wear them. My friend and I live in a town, and the bar is about a 35-minute walk away from our estate. We left at 8 p.m., and it was dark out, but we didn't mind. Plus our town was usually very quiet with very little commotion, and therefore we always felt safe regardless of whether it was night or day. The bar was extremely busy. There was a football match on, and a load of people came to watch. My friend and I managed to find a seat in the corner. It was nice and quiet, and we even met some really nice girls who were around our age and spoke to them for the majority of the night. It was about 11 p.m. when we decided to head for home. Although I had been drinking and there was alcohol in my system, I was not very drunk as I only had a few pints. Everything was normal until we saw a group of guys across the road, and they were being quite loud. We did our best to avoid eye contact, but they had crossed the road and were trailing closely behind us. We started to feel uncomfortable as there was no one else around, and the bar was about 15 minutes away, so we just kept walking. They started calling to us, making inappropriate sexual comments. My heart was racing as me and my friends started calling our parents, but they came up and surrounded us. There were 5 tall, largely built men now calling us awful things and threatening us. Bear in mind that my friend and I are 5'4". One of them made an attempt to touch me, attempted to hit us, and that's when we started screaming and ran as fast as possible. I felt like throwing up. The fear I had was indescribable, and there were no shops open at the time of night, so there's no way of finding help. Then my father pulled up in his car 5 minutes later, and I've never been so relieved in my life. We just hopped into the car trembling and crying, watching the group of creeps run off when they realized we knew who was in the car. My father was furious and disgusted and took us straight to the police to report what happened. Both of us were left traumatized at the thoughts of what could have happened and feel extremely grateful being unharmed. I thought that sharing this story was most important because strange things can happen, and it's important for you never to let your guard down, no matter where you live or where you are. I'm a 16-year-old female. I got off the bus as I usually do every day. I walked the same route that I've been walking since last year. Yesterday, however, it was different. I was walking home while scrolling through my phone and listening to music. As I'm rounding the corner, I see a shirtless grown man just standing there. Obviously, I acknowledged his presence, glanced at him, then continued my semi-long walk. I was getting close to rounding the corner to my apartment when I saw him walking right behind me. Immediately, my heart sank and I sped up. I thought I was just being paranoid until I heard him say, "Yeah, you beautiful," from behind me. At that point, I walked home as fast as humanly possible, unlocked the door, and rushed inside. Just knowing that I live in the same neighborhood as this creep has me shaking. I feel so sick and uncomfortable. I'm a military brat. My second tour coming to Japan, so I thought I didn't really have to worry about my safety. Never had a problem here during the first tour. I was 13 at the time. No one was home and I decided to go to the convenience store right around the corner. I do my shopping and notice the guy at the end of the aisle glancing at me over and over. He had baggy worn down black clothes, super pale, long hair, looked like he hadn't slept for days, and was super skinny. I quickly look away and just go to the next aisle, and he did the same, but not even in a subtle way. It was like we were playing tag or something, cause he was jerking and darting to whatever aisle I rushed to. Stupidly, I hurried to pay for my stuff and leave, and I thought that he didn't follow me back because my head was turned to make sure that he didn't come out of the store too. I relaxed after I turned the corner. Literally just minutes before I'm able to get to my house, I hear footsteps behind me. I turn and lock eyes with this guy. He's all wide-eyed and it scared the shit out of me. So my dumbass proceeds to speed walk to my house. He did the same. As I close my door, I see him speed walk past, still wide-eyed, staring at me in the face. I was scared for the rest of the month since he knew where I lived. I am 18 now, still in Japan, different house, and luckily I never saw him again. Okay, so this happened to me not even an hour ago, and I'm still shaking. I'm now safe, thank God, but I'm anxious and I could barely type this. I'm a 20-year-old female, and I'm currently staying with my boyfriend, who is 28, and he was having a small get-together. We were having some drinks, so once we were out of most of the juice, I decided to go to the nearby store to pick up a few. Now keep in mind, this store is about a 3-minute walk away, so I had no problems going by myself since I was the most sober one. I had about one drink and was in the middle of my second one. Everything on the way went perfectly fine. I went in, got what I needed, and left. As I was walking out, a man who looked to be in his mid to late 30s was about to walk in, but stopped. I kept walking, and he turned around to say, "Hey." I didn't respond and kept going my way. I know I didn't drop anything, and I had everything I came for, so there was no reason for any interactions, especially as it was nearly 3 a.m. Then he proceeds to start following me, and when he was close enough, he said, "You pretty. I need me a you." I again ignored him and kept walking. He then tapped me on the shoulder and asked me for my number. I said no and to please leave me alone. He replied with, "But you're so pretty, come on." I ignored and walked faster at this point. I needed to cross the street, so I called my boyfriend and gave him the rundown of what was going on, and he asked me for a description of the guy. I gave it to him, and I heard him putting his stuff on in the background. His friend asked him where he was going, and he said he needed to handle something. He instructed me to walk faster, and at this point I was run walking basically, and I checked behind me and the guy was still following me. He made a gesture for me to lower my phone. "Don't go calling anyone now." Now I just start running, and out of nowhere I crash into my boyfriend. By that point, I looked behind me and the guy wasn't there anymore. I'm not sure if he was hiding or something, but he was gone. My boyfriend hugged me and asked me where he was, and I said I don't know. He told me if I wanted him to go check, and I just said no, take me back home. I am now sitting in his room, absolutely horrified. He asked me if I'm okay, and I said that I am, and that I'm used to this behavior, but I can't help but be terrified. Usually when I tell someone to leave me alone, they will, except for a few times, but I can count those encounters on one hand. But this was so scary, and the fact that he gestured me to lower the phone was something that makes me just want to throw up. His friends asked what happened, and their girlfriends came in to check on me once he told them. I'm now sitting with them in the room, and they are comforting me. I don't know why this keeps happening. I'm just sick of this. So I've never really posted on Reddit before, but this is a story that I always think is my worst experience as a woman. Now I know I'm lucky, as I have not had much trauma from the opposite sex since I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere, which was pretty safe. But I moved into the city a few hours away a couple years ago, and since then I realized how naive I am. I'm going to try to leave out a few details, since I don't want the other person involved to realize what I'm talking about if they happen to see this, so sorry if I end up being a bit vague. So not long after I moved here, a friend and I had to go shop for food. It was a normal shopping trip, nothing out of the ordinary. It was still winter, but we didn't go out late, so it was still bright when we were walking back home, and the trip wasn't far, so we would always walk there. On the way back, we crossed the road per usual to head up our road, and we see a man in his high visible vest. He was probably about 5'7" and maybe in his late 40s, early 50s. He wasn't particularly built, like not thin but not muscular, just your standard middle-aged man with gray hair. I assumed that he was a workman, as there was a building having work done to it at the end of the road, so I didn't think much of it until I watched him snort some sort of substance off the fence barricade next to the road. First red flag. He then made a beeline for us and asked us for some change. I thought it was weird because I still thought he was a workman, but now I can only assume that he found the vest from the building that was being worked on and took it, but who knows. As usual, I quickly dropped my line of, "Oh, I'm really sorry, but I don't have any change," which is usually the case because I never get money out of the bank and mainly just use my card, and I hate ignoring homeless people because it makes me feel super mean. However, this man suddenly starts asking us 1,000,001 questions and walking beside me. Since it was a while ago, I don't particularly remember everything that was said, but I remember the gist of it. He was asking us where we lived, and because we were not stupid, we pretty much ignored him, but he was getting more and more insistent, and I worried about him getting aggressive, so after a few more, "Come on, don't be silly girls, where do you live? What's your address?" I decided to reply. I was like, "Oh, I live in this city." Haha. It was an awkward laugh, by the way. I don't know how to handle these type of situations, and I'm one of those people that laugh at everything, so I think it was probably just to ease the tension. This seemed to annoy the man, and once again he called me silly and asked again where I lived. At this point, my friend slowly started walking off ahead of me. I wasn't super annoyed at the time, but every time I revisit the story, it irritates me more. So I was more or less stuck with this man now. I just kept dodging his questions, and I think I said something along the lines of, "I don't feel comfortable telling strangers my address." I was still super polite, but clearly feeling uncomfortable, and now my friend was at least 10 meters ahead of me. This man goes on to tell me what part of the city he lived in, and again, told me to stop being silly and tell him where I lived. I'm not sure how long this went on for, but once he started to get more annoyed at me for not telling him where I lived, he decided to get even creepier. I'd also like to add that we were getting increasingly closer to where I lived, and I was having to think up a plan to not let him know where I lived, as it would be very obvious in the next couple minutes. The man decides to add, "Well, you don't need to tell me. I work in your building, so I can find your address down to the XYZ. You live up here, don't you? There's a lot of loud music most nights. It's hard for homeless people to sleep because of the loud music, you know?" I'm also certain that he doesn't work in my building, as he didn't have the same uniform, and I never saw him before the situation. But now I'm terrified. A couple nights before this incident, I had heard from some people where I live talking about how a homeless man had turned up inside complaining about the loud music and threatening people with a knife. I didn't know if anything had been done about the man, so now I was thinking, what if this was the same person? I was just preparing myself to get stabbed in the middle of the street. I don't remember how I reacted to what the man was saying. I imagine it was a lot of, "Oh, and really?" But by some luck, a man walks past me and the man following me, and the man suddenly turns to him asking for money. I take that moment and quickly enter my building. I was very relieved since he turned around right before I got to the entrance. I didn't even turn back to see what he was doing. I just quickly walked in. Now, if you want to know why my friend walked off, they told me not long after I got in and we started talking about what just happened. They told me, "Well, I thought since I had the shopping bags and your hands were free, if you tried anything, I wouldn't be able to do anything, and you would, so I walked ahead." I know that they were just scared, but so was I. And surely, sticking together in a situation like that is more likely to dissuade someone from doing anything. Whatever, nothing could be done about it now. I called the police not long after we got in, just to log with them what happened, as I didn't want this man to approach a woman on her own, or do something worse. The officer was lovely, but I never heard anything else about the situation. So yeah, weird man on coke or something. Let's not meet.